name's CRob. I do security stuff on the internet. I work in an organization called the Open Source Security Foundation. We are a project of the Linux Foundation. I've been doing upstream open source vulnerability coordination for about 15 years. Everything I know about upstream open source security, my former mentor, Mark Cox, taught me. So, yeah. I am not a lawyer. I am absolutely none of your lawyers either. I am not giving you legal advice. The CRA is a law. There are pretty hefty consequences. So after today, if you're inspired about what we talked about and what you've learned about this new legislation, I encourage you to go talk to your lawyer to get your organization's take on what your obligations or what you'll need to do to fulfill your obligations. So this is all based on my early years of experience doing cybersecurity and upstream open source security. So these are all my opinions. And when, oh, it's a freaking laser. When the little probe head pops up, that's my TLDR for you all, kind of breaking down what's going on. The CRA is just the latest in a long line of about 100 years of case law that are applicable within cybersecurity around the globe. It is not the only law. It won't be the last, but it certainly is one that has a lot of consequences for folks that either live or work in the European Union, or if your organization is selling products with digital elements to European citizens. Basically, the CRA is designed to be a consumer protection law to give European citizens the ability to be made whole again after a cybersecurity breach. This is one of the first laws that we're aware of that talks about open source software in particular. There's been a great new role added in, we'll talk about in a few seconds, that pertains specifically to open source. But this is designed to basically, if there's some type of incident, if somebody has a phone and their personal data is exposed, they come to some harm, it gives the European citizen the means to get treatment from that. It is very consequential from my perspective. I feel that a lot of what the legislators put together is trying to codify into law what I have been using throughout my cybersecurity practice for 30 years or so. The newest innovation is talking about SBOMs, but everything else in there is stuff. It's CISSP 101, it's MOM and apple pie, protecting CRA, software development lifecycle, vulnerability management. So these aren't like new concepts, but what they did, unlike how we do it here in the States, is they put this into law. In the United States, we'll typically do things through our procurement system, government procurement, and kind of force the vendors through that means. It's not legal action, but if you want to sell with the government, you need to do what they do. Europe took a different tactic where they put this into law. There are some very severe consequences for non-compliance. If you are non-compliant with the requirements, that could be up to 2.5 times your annual turnover, your annual revenue for last year for each incident. If you are found providing misleading information, that's potential 1% of your revenue penalty. So, and that's per incident. So if you have a product that has many complex components, there are potential that you could rack up a pretty substantial bill if this would go to court. There are some unique European laws are written very differently than we are here in the States. It's very wordy and very nuanced. And there are some terms that they use again and again and again. The first one is products with digital elements. And this is a hardware or software product, and including its remote data processing solutions. So if you have an app on a phone and it requires some type of cloud infrastructure to support that, some type of server, that becomes in scope. Broadly, hyperscalers are not obliged for extra things under this law. There's a different law for hyperscalers and cloud. But again, if you have some type of element, some type of remote processing that is included as part of your product can't work if you have a toy that has a database of things in the cloud. And yeah, that's required for that product to work. That is in scope of the law. So you'll see the PDE, products with digital elements, all over the thing. There are two other phrases that my first reading I failed to capture the nuance of, but you'll see this again and again and again, where you'll see the term placing on the market. This is the first time that you put this product for sale within the union. And then there's making available on the market. And this is considered a commercial activity. And this is all focused around the exchange of money. So it's not, and this is where getting into my particular slice of heaven, open source. A lot of open source developers have been, we're not, there are no compliance obligations for a upstream maintainer. But as you read the law, again, you'll see phrases like this, and you'll just need to kind of suss apart what they were going for in a particular article or the annex. There are broadly 3 roles. This is primarily focused on manufacturers, and you should consider this to be commercial vendors. I sell a router, I sell a phone, this type of thing. But it does include software as well as PDEs. The new role, and this is broadly, like even within FIRST or within the Linux Foundation, my members, majority of my members are vendors.
Yeah.
They created this new role, the open source steward, and this is some type of legal entity that works with and shepherds and stewards a open source project. Broadly, you can think about this as a open source foundation, like Apache, Eclipse, Linux Foundation, those types of entities. But that's not; those aren't the only people that can be stewards. And there is a specific section that speaks to the stewardship obligations. So most of you probably are not stewards. You might be in some cases. But again, read the law, talk to your lawyer to have understand what your specific obligations are. And again, there's open source developers. They talk a lot about distributors and importers. Most of us aren't in those types of roles. But again, this is focused on the consumer, European consumer, to protect
their rights. They will use the term CSIRT a lot. And within FIRST, we understand that there are different types of security teams. And the context with which they use CERT is how we would understand CERT, a computer emergency response team, not a corporate security incident response team or a product security incident response team. So you'll see that in the law, and that's actually defined in the Blue Guide as well, I think. My pal Fukami put this little mind map together. Super easy to understand. I'm sure you immediately all get it, but this talks about the different roles. You have manufacturers and distributors and importers. Where's open source steward? Open source steward's in there somewhere. But basically this talks about all the different roles, talks about some of the different actions or responsibilities you have to take. And this is available if you're curious. These slides are already in my GitHub repo, and they should be available, I think, through FIRST as well. But you can take a look at this picture and enjoy it all day long if you so desire. The law is a lot. I've had the opportunity to read it 4 times all the way through now, which is wonderful. But it's about 90, 100 pages long. Super great to fall asleep to. But there are certain sections that are more important than others. Article 3 talks about the definitions. Like in this context, this is what product with digital elements means, and that echoes things that are in like the Blue Guide and whatnot. Article 6, 7, and 8 talks about critical and important products with digital elements, and that's predominantly where a lot of the administrivia of being a manufacturer comes into play. That if you have a product that qualifies as a critical or important thing, you have more work to do, talking with the market surveillance authorities or interacting more with a national CERT or whatever that might be. Article 13 talks about obligations of manufacturers and blah, 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 blah. you should, I would strongly encourage everyone that if you have some type of role obligation within your company managing the security of products, you need to take a look at this just to understand, be familiar with some of the things. And again, I'll do the little bit of TLDR here for you. There are a couple other documents that are adjacent to the CRA. You have the Product Liability Directive, and this talks about more, this is more about the legal end of things, that if a EU citizen feels hurt, damaged by your product, this is kind of how that process works. There is the Blue Guide, which is about all the definitions used throughout EU legislation. It's like a dictionary, so to speak. And again, my pal Fukami, these are all of the other either laws, directives, or kind of adjacent bills or things that are in the orbit of the CRA. So it's a lot. Again, I have a link to a spreadsheet that details this. And if you're curious, but the law itself is written, it's done, but they will be amending it. And there are other things, there's an interaction, like for example, if you make aircraft or marine equipment, there's different set of laws, and there's like a precedence depending on which law is in the hierarchy, which ones has more precedence over others. But these are all things that are kind of CRA adjacent. So this is first, we are product security and incident response. We're all awesome people. I'm going to focus my conversation on things that product security teams need to be aware of out of the law. We have a lot of conversations today talking about the CRA from different aspects. I'm laser focused on product security teams. There are certain things that these organizations will need to do and be aware of. And hopefully you have a lot of these processes in place, and it's just a matter of tuning it to come out a little faster or produce evidence a little bit different way. But that's how we are looking at this. I'm going to talk about Annex I. Annex I has 21 requirements. They're roughly split into two categories. The first is classic cybersecurity, secure by default, secure by design type things, SDLC. The second half is all about vulnerability disclosure, vulnerability coordination, which is, again, the bread and butter of a product security team. So within Annex I, it is now an expectation, and unlike here in the States, where we had the secure by design promise, we're promising we'll do the right things. It's now the law in Europe and will go into effect in December 2027. But you are required to make your products secure by design, secure by default. And there's certain evidence that you will need to produce and share with the market surveillance authorities, or there's a process where you need to have your product certified, going through the CE mark process potentially, and you might need to share with those. And other times you're obliged to cooperate with a national CSIRT or a NISA. NISA is kind of the equivalent to the US CISA agency. They're responsible for coordination across the whole union. So you'll need to potentially provide information or artifacts to ENISA, a national CERT, market surveillance authority, or the CE mark auditor, so to speak. So you'll need to make sure you have your documentation in order. How was your solution designed and architected in a way that is secure as it can be before it goes out the door? Hopefully you already do this. Your documentation may not be great. Well, you've got about 2 years to get it in a shape that will be acceptable when you're called in to do an audit, so to speak. Next item, part of Annex I, item 2 is talking about your product must not be placed on the market without any known exploitable vulnerabilities. With any. What did I say? Oh, it needs to be without. But yeah, you can't have any exploited vulns, and that's a process kind of on the tail end of your SDLC before the product goes out the door. Most of you today probably do some type of scan using a source code analysis or whatever tooling. So you're going to need to provide evidence that on this day, when we started to sell this product, we are not aware of any exploited vulns within our package. You probably are doing this today, hopefully. If you aren't, strongly consider you start doing it this afternoon so that you can be prepared. Because again, this we will get, as we're going through the amendment process with the commission and organizations like Sensenelac and Etsy, we're going to get examples of implementation. So we'll get an example of what the artifact will look like, what they desire it to be. So again, getting yourself set up that you can produce this report today will help you easily adjust if they want it formatted differently or they need different data elements. So again, starting October 2027 is a bad idea. Start this afternoon if you haven't already. A lot of the folks in this room already have programs within their organizations to help manage their interactions with the CRA. And this is a larger corporate issue, but again, we're focused specifically on how the product security team can help your organization be compliant. Annex I, item 3 talks about a risk assessment. You need to be doing risk assessments. You probably all are doing this today. ENISA has a toolbox framework of how they do risk assessments. There'll be a particular methodology they would like you to follow, and I think it broadly follows ISO 27005, I think. But they will want to, you will need to provide evidence that you have done a risk assessment. You do risk assessments all throughout the product's life cycle. You'll need to understand how this product is used by customers, how, threat modeling it to how it could be broken, and what controls you're putting into place to stop these potential vulnerabilities or weaknesses. So there's a whole section here that talks just about the risk assessment and types of things you'll need to be doing. But basically, it boils down to you need to protect CIA of your product and think about protecting customer data. They talk a lot about risk management. If you look at Article 13.4, it talks about as you're going through the Market Surveillance Authority process, you will need to share with the regulators your risk assessment. So again, you might do this informally today. I strongly encourage you to look at ENISA's framework. BSI did, I think, a better written version of the ENISA workflow. BSI is the German equivalent to CISA. Great folks. But take a look at one of those 2 items and start to shift your program to make sure you're accounting for the things they want you to have, like a risk register, talking about formal steps you've taken to mitigate threats and weaknesses and vulns. And again, you probably are doing something today. You might be following NIST or CISA's risk management framework. It may be equivalent, might not, and I would just encourage you to go straight to the source. ENISA is a name in it, is an entity named by name in the law several times. So they wrote something. I would encourage you to look at that and consider that the standard of quality you need to follow. We jump down to the second section, which is talking about vulnerability handling. And again, hopefully all my friends here, this should not be new. Your team should have these capabilities and do these things, although you might not be following the specific desired timeframes. And that's where you're going to need to make some adjustments to your program. First item here, hey, SBOM, say SBOM 3 times and Alan Friedman shows up. But they are, the law requires you to, at request, give the Market Surveillance Authority or ENISA or other entities your software bill of materials. You're not required to publicly publish it. You're not required necessarily to give it to your customers, but you must give it to the legal authorities. So if you aren't doing SBOMs today, you better figure that out this afternoon and figure out a way that you're going to produce that at request. And one of the standardization pathways, there's about 41 to 50 different standardization work streams, which is awesome. One of those we're talking about defining what the Europeans want to see in their SBOM. Hopefully it hews closely to the minimum required elements for SBOM that CISA and NTIA published, but we don't know that for a fact. So there will be an amendment that speaks to what the SBOM artifact needs to have. So again, get your capability in place today that you can repeatedly create an SBOM And I would encourage you to make SBOM. There's 6 different types. I would encourage you to leverage all 6, depending on what the use case is. They have different applications, but probably they're going to want to have the build SBOM is probably what you'll need to share with them. But I don't know that for a fact yet. You need to make sure that you have the capability to remediate vulnerabilities without delay, and including providing security updates. If you're a PSIRT, I hope you're doing this today. The without delay, I haven't seen exactly what that target means. But again, be prepared to, if there's a vulnerability, you can react and issue a fix. What I personally enjoy about the law, aside from the fact that it's codifying cybersecurity and everything I've been telling people, asking people to do for years, is they encourage better upstream engagement for manufacturers. So depending on which report you read, between 70 and 96% of commercial software includes open source components. And the law here encourages manufacturers to engage with upstream. Things like, if you make your own fix, contribute that back upstream. If your software doesn't have, isn't supported, if it doesn't have infrastructure or maintainers, the manufacturers are encouraged to participate and make those upstream components stronger, because you're the one selling them for money, not the upstream maintainer or project. But basically, they tell you that they want you to share the patches upstream, which I think is great. I'm very excited about that, because that's how the software that you all depend on upstream is going to continue to be able to thrive and leverage within your products. Mr. Brissell. Microphone, please, sir.
Other than a stern telling off, do we know what happens if you don't share those upstream? We don't see them.
I've not been given an indication about what the consequences may be if you don't share upstream. We'll see. They'll figure that out. Oh, do we have a question from Discord? Oh, okay. Well, that makes me sad. So again, if you use open source software, and I'm pretty sure you all do, it's in your best interest to understand how those upstream projects work and how best you can help them be sustainable and vital, because some of these obligations that you're going to see here in a slide or two are very strict on you, and upstream has no obligation to help you out. Upstream people are nice, they like helping, but they're not required to do anything in the law. Something you may or may not have today is a formal support policy. On this date, this product is supported for blah time. The law codifies that you will publish your support period, and it will be at least 5 years from the last major change. So there's some interesting nuances to this. If you provide, what's the term? Substantive change, I think. So if you do a service pack for a product and you update it, it's considered a major substantial change. Your 5-year timer resets to that date that you drop that service pack. So this is a rolling date. You need to be aware of that, because your products may not publish a support life cycle, but you will need to. And again, thinking about that 80 to 96% of your components, upstream sure as heck doesn't have this. So how are you going to be able to fulfill your obligations without the help of these upstream folks? Oh, well, question from the handsome man in the unicorn tie.
So do you think that that's going to discourage people from updating their software, because they're going to realize that if they do a major update or a substantive update, whatever that means, it reset? Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Well, as I move on to my slides, you'll find out you are not allowed not to update it. Ha ha. But again, remember, this is a rolling date from the last substantive changes. Your 5-year timer starts again. Careful there, sir. Question from the handsome man in the purple waistcoat.
Leading question.
Lavender.
How much can you charge people for these updates, CRob?
Well, fun fact, the law now tells you you are forbidden for charging for security updates. It is illegal to do that. So you potentially need to figure out your revenue streams and how you're going to navigate that. Again, go talk to your legal weasel and they'll help you out with how your particular organization might react to that. Yes, manufacturers shall ensure that each security update is available. So you provide a patch. That patch must be accessible for 10 years. You may not have that capability today. It doesn't necessarily need to be on a public website. That would probably be smiled upon by the regulators, but it's not required. But you need to be able to have those patches for 10 years if a customer asks for it. Pretty great. And there's the substantial modification clause. You'll see this a bunch of times popping up. And let's see, and all of the bolding, the color coding is my emphasis. Otherwise, giving you a wall of legal text is not awesome. Question?
Yeah, does this work?
It does. Hi, Bruce.
Well, if you're gonna have to give out security fixes for free, everyone's gonna move to usage fees. You can't use it this month unless you pay so much money. So that just converts security fixes into usage fees. So how does this work
Possibly.
with usage fees?
Uh,
If you only paid up through the end of the year, then is the 5-year obligation gone if you can't buy more? Or
That's
what?
an excellent question for your legal weasels. I cannot provide that advice to you. They don't talk about usage fees. They talk about charging for security updates. So I don't know if trying to change the name, removes that obligation for you.
Well, just a usage fee. It's not a security fix.
But
It's a usage fee. You can't use my product, like Adobe does.
Mr. Bohannon, I think, has a question or comment. Yes, I will repeat the question or statement.
The fact that you don't get a usage fee doesn't undermine the 5-year requirement. So there are two distinct elements. So regardless of whether you're charging, but you still got to support that product on the market. Or face fines for not maintaining the requirements.
So the clarification
It sounds like you have to give them the patch, but they can't use it.
So the clarification we got is, irregardless of your stance, you are still obliged to support that product for 5 years.
That's it. That's the fundamental.
I understand, but
Or you're going to be thrown off the market.
sure, I'm just trying to understand what usage fees do to that. Because if I only pay for 1 year.
Having spent 3 years working with so you're
Okay,
It's something you might want to talk with your legal friends. And if you get the opportunity to talk with the commission or Anissa or anybody, probably a question you want to ask. But that is not, I have not heard that question before, Bruce. And again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a guy doing security on the internet. When you place the product on the market, if you know or have reason to believe that your product is not in conformity with the EU, you shall immediately take corrective action. So if you have a product today on the EU market and the law goes into effect in December 2027, if that product is still available for sale, you are now obliged to fix the vulnerabilities in that potentially older product. This is, from my perspective, retroactive. So again, it's not all your new stuff from December 2027 on, it's everything that exists within your espoused support window. So this will potentially be an engineering burden for your product teams. So as the product security representatives for your entities, I would strongly encourage you to go talk to your engineering teams and plan for how you will deal with that and how you plan to, again, try to maintain compliance with your obligations. You must regularly test and review your product. So again, ideally, you're going through pen tests, code audits, you have assorted scanners within your tooling and build infrastructure. You're going to need to be able to provide evidence of what that process is and potentially the results of those tests if the Market Surveillance Authority asks you. This is probably something you don't have to do today. Back when I was at Red Hat, I had a couple customers that specifically asked for this, but it wasn't a big request. So again, you need to understand how you can do this if you are asked. You need to have a policy about coordinated vulnerability disclosure. I hope if you're here at this conference, you already have that. That should be table stakes for walking in the McKinnon Center today. But if you don't have that, that's a pretty easy thing to put into place. What your policy is, how people report vulnerabilities to you, kind of what your timelines and what your process is for the public. And then you want to make sure that you have a process of sharing information about potential vulnerabilities in your product, as well as third-party components. I know some organizations that don't issue advisories for third-party components in their products. That's going to have to change if you want to sell it in Europe. And again, people need to be able to, you need to have a mailing list, a blog, a website. You need to have an API that people can get access to your vulnerabilities as they're streaming through the pipeline. This is where it gets interesting, and you probably are or aren't doing some of these things. The regulation wants a single point of contact for your company. Within the FIRST community, there are several different flavors of security incident response teams. They don't care that your CSIRT manages the website and your laptops and that the PSIRT manages the products. They want a single point of contact that consumers and the market can engage with you to ask questions and whatnot. So again, if you have a split CSIRT, PSIRT, you're going to need to figure out a model for how tickets get appropriately routed to the right team, because in a slide or two, you're going to find out that there's some really harsh timelines put on you. And that single point of contact, you need to allow the consumer to engage with you by their preferred means, which again, it's kind of another vague term, but that could be a phone call, it could be an email, it could be a web form, carrier pigeon. So you need to be able to, if somebody's trying to communicate with you, you need to be able to ingest that particular request. And that's why today it'd be a great idea to start to train your customers. security@blah.com is how you email us, start training folks that's how you would like the process to go. You will notify a national CERT and ENISA if you are aware of any actively exploited vulnerabilities. I don't know a lot of PSIRTs today that are actively seeking out exploited information. You might not have a threat hunting team or capability. You will need to be aware of that. And as potential problems and vulnerabilities are found, you're going to need to share that through something they're calling the single reporting platform. We'll talk about that in a second. This is another eye chart, but this is the timelines. So if you are aware of an actively exploited vulnerability, you have 24 hours. 24 hours to notify ENISA and a national CSIRT over in Europe. That is the law, my friends. You may or may not have the ability to do that today. I encourage you to run out of the McKinnon Center after our day of CRA talks and figure out how you'll be able to do this. My personal feeling, and I haven't talked with the commission or anybody yet, but I think something like VEX, this is under investigation, that may be sufficient for the 24-hour notice, might not. We'll see. And then You will provide essentially a security advisory, a vulnerability notification within 72 hours that you're aware of this being actively exploited, and you will either provide a patch or a workaround for customers within 72 hours. And then you need to have a final report 14 days after the initial awareness of this particular thing. Right, and there was a point, there are parts of the
Can you
law
repeat
that go
that?
into effect.
Can you repeat that?
I'm going to paraphrase. There are certain parts of the law that go into effect 2026, I believe September 2026, and it's around the vulnerability reporting. So you have less time to get prepared for these pieces I'm going to talk about now. Accurate paraphrase? Excellent.
How do they define actively exploited?
Yes.
Lovely. Thank you.
This is something we're all working out together. A lot of these items are, again, being debated and discussed, whether it's with the commission or the standardization bodies. So we will get more information about what they want and kind of how to implement this particular capability. But it's better to have something today that you tweak than trying to create this from scratch, August 2026. Mr. Purcell.
Again, you may be coming to it, but I believe that there is provision for embargoes in certain circumstances. Is that correct?
Yes, there is the ability to have embargoes. The language there is kind of light, but that refers more to your kind of mom and apple pie regular vulnerabilities, not these actively exploited. This is something that there's, you have evidence that there's a cyber breach, that your people are being victims of ransomware or DDoS and whatnot. Now, the other thing that's going to get you all a little itchy, the other piece around vulnerability reporting is you shall notify of any severe incident having an impact of the security of your product. And that notification goes to both ENISA and a national CSIRT, which I will talk about in a slide or two. So this is your traditional vulnerability response. Hopefully you all are doing this today. You're probably not going to like the time frames. So for your regular vulnerabilities, you are expected to provide an early warning of a severe incident, which my reading of that, it states any vulnerability that affects the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of a product. And my personal interpretation is that is essentially every vulnerability, because you don't have a vulnerability if it doesn't impact CIA. Hopefully we'll get some clarity around this phrase, but basically you have 24 hours to submit this early notification that we are aware of a vulnerability. Then essentially you have 72 hours to have more information. I'll get you in a second, Abby. You'll have 72 hours to provide more information, ideally workarounds or preferred patches. 72 hours. And then you have a final report that's due to ENISA and everybody. And I think that was a month afterwards. Abby,
Chris, so I think
a little closer to the mic, please.
I think you might have answered it, but for the 72-hour notification, are they expecting a plan or to have the patches in effect?
Yes. The text essentially, as again, I'm not your lawyer, as I read it, it appears as if you could be able to publish an advisory stating this is what the problem is and talk about workarounds. I believe they are going to desire the fixes. I don't know that they are going to require that. And again, that's this will be ironed out as we engage with the commissions and Sanilac, ETSI, and ENISA, and everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So again, you are probably doing this today. You will need to do it faster. And if you rely on upstream open source for some of these vulnerability fixes, if you don't do all the engineering yourself, I know very few projects that are happy in turning around a patch upstream within 72 hours. And again, the developer isn't obliged to do that. You all are. So how are you going to solve this problem with your supply chain? And this is where the severe incident. So an incident that has impact on the security of the product is considered severe when it negatively affects or is capable of negatively affecting the ability of the product to protect availability, authenticity, integrity, confidentiality of sensitive or important data. So essentially, if it touches on personal data, healthcare data, anything data-y, it's considered severe, so that you're off to the races and you have that 72 hours to get that fixed together. Now, they talk about a CSIRT. Many of the organizations I've worked with are incorporated within the union. So you might have an office in Germany or France or Spain or wherever that might be. So this will be easy for you to decide. But if you don't have offices within the 27 nations in the union, you're going to need to pick a national CSIRT as a buddy. And you could pick the Nordic CERT, you could pick BSI. There's a lot of choices, and they give you a little algorithm, so to speak. Article 14, item 7 talks about if you don't have an office in Europe, which would probably be the default. That's the piece, the CERT I'll work with. If you don't have that today, they give you a little matrix of how to figure that out. And it's based off of, you need to know like what country you sell the most product in. So that'll probably be the place that you want to establish that relationship with the national CERT. But they talk about this. So that's Article 14, item 7. So please read that and get that figured out. And that's probably before the 2026 date. You'll need to have that figured out. So when you're aware of a vulnerability that's being actively exploited, you are obliged to inform the impacted users. No definition on that. That could be an advisory, could be an email, it could be a blog. You'll need to figure this out. You're probably doing this today. And what is 9 telling me? And that they mention here in Article 14, item 9, that they will continue to amend certain pieces of the legislation. So the core of it is done, it's locked in, but there will be additional clarification and refinement and pointing out to ways to implement the desired outcomes they want. All right, they talk about providing a secure way to distribute your updates. So you need to be able to have HTTPS, TLS, whatever, you need to provide your updates securely so they can be verified to be untampered. And then Annex 1.8 is that you will issue the security fixes without delay and free of charge. Woo! And that is broadly the law. It's not all doom and gloom. I have some advice from you. I'm CRob, I'm from the open source. I'm here to help. Their upstream is doing quite a lot of work on this, trying to prepare our projects, our maintainers, our stewards, and then ultimately our members, which are the manufacturer. We're doing a lot of work to try to help prepare you. My organization, Eclipse, basically every foundation on the planet is kind of looking at this and trying to figure out how to solve it and collaborate together to have something that's useful. We just recently, the Linux Foundation released 2 research reports. One is terrible news, the other is good news. The terrible news, the Unaware and Uncertain report, we surveyed 600 open source maintainers, projects, and manufacturers. And we got some terrible news that many people that should be aware and taking steps are not. Upstream and people that upstream adjacent aren't necessarily ready to help you yet. But then we did a second report, Pathways to Cybersecurity Best Practices in Open Source, where we cite 3 upstream projects that today are fulfilling significant obligations within the CRA. So leveraging projects like these or adopting their methodologies will be useful both for a manufacturer, but also other open source projects. So those are both freely available. This was the worst stat that made me so sad. 62% of the people out of the 600 people we surveyed were either not familiar at all or were only slightly familiar with the CRA. And it was an abysmal figure that understood the December 2027 date. So again, if you take nothing else away from VolnCon, a lot of great stuff, understand what the dates are for you if you sell into Europe to European citizens. The Linux Foundation has created a CRA 101 class. The materials are publicly available today in our GitHub repo, and the course should go online probably in about a week. Yeah, so it's a free class, and if you want to learn more about the legislation, we have a free class for you. It'll be on LF Education. It'll be LFEL 1001. And we're working on, I'm writing a class right now, how to do a risk assessment per the ANISA risk management methodology. So if you would like to pick that up, that'll probably come out summer. I haven't had time to start it yet because I have too damn many CRA meetings. We also have a project called the Security Baseline. We looked at 41 cybersecurity either laws or compliance controls, and these are good practices we think that upstream could adopt and downstream absolutely should be doing. So we have 8 categories. It looks at things like access control, your build and release system, documentation, governance, legal, which is predominantly licensing, quality assurance, which is testing, security assessment, and vulnerability management. This is organized by 3 levels of maturity. So we feel, and through our pilot program, we've gotten feedback from actual open source maintainers that level 1 should be attainable by a single person project. So somebody on their own that wanted to do the right thing could do this. But if we had some downstream help, somebody that was a critical downstream that felt that this software was great, it's an opportunity for you all to step in and help instantiate these processes and artifacts into the software that you know and love. I've created a compliance crosswalk where I have looked at several legal regimes and several well-known cybersecurity frameworks like the NIST cybersecurity framework, the SSDF. I have lined this up against the CRA Annex I. And if you follow the baseline, you will be able to fulfill 19 of the 21 items within Annex I. The only things we don't cover upstream would be managing sensitive data, PII type stuff, and then giving the ability for a consumer to remove their data from your system. That's not something that, again, upstream generally doesn't interact with this stuff. We write the source code. You all are producing the product that delivers that functionality. But yeah, so if you followed all the baseline criteria, you should be able, you have very good ground to stand on to defend yourself against the market surveillance authorities or auditors. And we are in flight right now to start automating this. So there will be a tool that you run this baseline checker against a software repository. It will identify where you are or aren't compliant, and then it will helpfully file a PR for the project to be able to implement those changes. And a lot of it's documentation. Do you have a process? How do you vet maintainers coming in, that type of stuff. And this is my primary stakeholder with the baseline is upstream open source. But then my secondary persona I care about are downstream manufacturers. So these are rules, requirements based in frameworks you're probably already using today. And this is upstream helping downstream, helping upstream to do more. So again, if you look at Annex I and you look at the baseline, or you have your own checklist, I encourage you, again, after you run off and figure out how you're going to do the reporting at the end of the day and how you're going to, who's your national CSIRT buddy, you should start to figure out how you're going to start to assist the critical upstream open source projects you consume. There is a ton of information available on the internet, whether you're going to the CRA portal. There's an expert group that several of us in the room participate in. There's Anissa's website. I really like the documentation from BSI. I think they do a really good job. So that's a nice model to look at actual implementation guidance before we get the standardization worked out. We have a working group where we talk about global regulation. Today, it's mostly about the CRA, but we also will talk about US or Chinese or Indian or British laws. We have a public policy committee. We have a whole website focused in on what my group is doing, but there are a lot of other groups like the Eclipse Orc Working Group. They have a ton of information available out there. So don't be unaware and uncertain. There are ways for you to get the information you need to be compliant. That's all I have prepared. What additional questions? I think I have some tissues up here if you have, gonna have a cry. What can we, anything else you want to know more about? Or ask the room. And this isn't all the CRA obligations. This is just PSIRT. There's a bunch of other stuff your company needs to be doing outside of that.
Right, but on the previous page, you had some really good references and things. Presumably, all of those different groups agree on everything.
You're killing me, Burcell. Fun fact, there is no such thing as the open source. Getting two developers to agree on anything is a challenge at best of times. So there are a couple different groups working to solve this problem within their kind of domain of expertise. We do talk. A lot of the foundations today talk, and I would encourage you all to go reach out to, if you're a member of any of these organizations, talk with them, find out what your affiliate organization is doing and how you can contribute and help them help all of you. Oh, yeah. Stay tuned. The gentleman in the handsome lavender waistcoat has some assistance in that particular area coming later. Mr. Bohannon.
Thanks. Again, my name is Mark Bohannon. Worked with CRob at Red Hat. Actually, I was actually his lawyer and played the role of telling him what he could and could not say.
Right.
I thought I might just offer my own perspective on a couple of things.
Please.
You did very well at CRob.
Thank you.
No, and you're free, given the reversed roles now, to tell me I'm full of it at this point. But I think there are a couple of things that would be helpful for people to get in their heads about this. CRob made reference that this is a consumer protection initiative. It is not a security initiative. And you got to get your head around the fact that the model of this is that ultimately what you're going to have is the old-fashioned CE mark on your product.
Yep.
For those of you who don't know what the CE mark is, think about your toaster, okay? And on the back of it, there are all these Underwriters Laboratory CE marks that they have conformed. They are taking a framework that was developed for physical products, particularly for consumers, and now applying it to products with digital elements. I say that because one thing that, and I encourage you to incorporate this, get your head around these class 1 and class 2 products. If there's one thing that you take away, know which class you're in, because the hill you have to climb will either be 45, 50-degree angle or a direct 90-degree angle. If you're class 1, you will simply have I say simply, you will have to only attest subject to, fraud and everything else to a provider of a CE mark to say you can get it. The class 2 are going to have to do that with a third-party validation. Think common criteria on steroids. If those of you in the telecom industry, if you remember the old electromagnetic compatibility that took 15 years to try to work out, they're trying to do what took 15 years in the EMC and do it in 2 years. So the testing is not necessarily going to be by the entities you've used compliance testing for, like PSI or any of those. It's going to be the network of third-party evaluators that are very politically powerful in Europe that are authorized to give the CE mark. So I think that's a very important
Yeah.
piece, particularly if you're in a company. Work with the teams that have been doing compliance, because they will have a mindset that helps you, technical compliance for this. So otherwise, I thought it was very solid, great
you.
work. And we're all trying to figure out what this means. And I lived it for 3 or 4 years. This is not suspend logic. Chaos theory is, I think, the best tool to understand what is going on with the CRA. So
Yeah, thank you. It looks like my friend Sarah might have a question or comment.
Can you talk a little bit more about those expert groups that are on the Learn More? What is an expert group and who contributes to it?
Yes, so there are several entities that are affiliated with this process. One of the named groups is called the Expert Group, and this is predominantly European citizens, cybersecurity experts within the European Union, and then a select group of liaisons. Folks like Eclipse and the Linux Foundation are part of this expert group. And this is where a lot of the high level kind of conversation and debate happens. ENISA and the commission representatives are there. So this is a very influential, but very closed group. As a US citizen, I am allowed to be on some of these things and I'm not allowed to be on others. So check and see. There are many corporations that are part of that advisory list, or there are foundations like Eclipse and OpenSSF/Linux Foundation that participate. There's also a group called CENCENELAC, which does standardization across the union. They have 41 potential standards they're discussing and debating. So that's like, 41 extra meetings. Yay. Then there's another group called ETSI, which is another kind of standardization entity within the union. And my perception is ETSI seems a little bit more practical. I am currently applying to be allowed to liaise with both groups. It's a very complex process. My first application to CENCENELAC was rejected because I didn't list off the headquarters of all of our members in Europe. I just gave them a web page and they didn't like that. So the bar to get in is pretty high. And if you're interested, again, I would encourage you to work with entities that are already there. If you already have an industry group or a foundation that you partner with or you're a member of, I would encourage you to work through those entities because the actual application process is a pain. Yes.
How would software as a service scope into this? Say,
So how does software as a service be affected by this? Well, broadly, if it is sold to a European consumer and it is some type of artifact that they work with. So I mentioned you have an app on a smartphone. You're a bank and you give your customers an app on the smartphone. So the app on the phone is required to be compliant, and any infrastructure back in the cloud or your data center that supports that is required, needs to go under the scrutiny of the law. Now, broadly, hyperscalers like Google Mail, that type of stuff is out of scope. There's a different law that manages that will take precedence. But think about any infrastructure back at the mothership that supports this consumer product. That would need to be in scope. And then, as Mr. Bohannon mentioned, there's Class 1 and Class 2 products, which the commission is asking for feedback on right now. So if you have feelings about the definitions of things like what is a router, what is an operating system, the commission is taking feedback on that. And I and Eclipse and others are working to provide them feedback. But again, if you fall into that area, you might have the easy button to kind of self-assess, but you might get the hard path, which sucks, which is, the rubber glove treatment. But again, it's anything that supports that product back at the mothership, but not your whole network, for example.
and consumer, That's the other piece I wanted to poke at is like if you're a business to business sort of SaaS provider.
The
So,
business to business, I believe, is covered by another law.
okay.
So it is not directly in scope of the CRA.
Different, don't get hung up on it. Remember, this is not the US mentality. This is not even being able to get into the market. We're not talking about sort of for a federal agency or banking, this is even just sell. So that distinction between business and consumer, the way we think about the US, even in the EU, may not be applicable because most companies now don't want to put down and bifurcate the product model for a lot of reasons. So that's a distinct reality that even though you may not have a traditional consumer market, you may not have a product that is different, which you sell business and purchasing instead of you sell it. That's a unique situation in life for the product market.
Yeah.
Okay.
And things like your website aren't in scope.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
We got a question from Discord.
Nice.
I'm going to read it verbatim.
Okay.
OSS, if the original product has vulnerabilities and there are versions available via repackaging, et cetera, that may be downstream in a supply chain, is the entire supply chain considered a single entity for the purposes of this law?
No, the entity that sold the good for money must be compliant and do effective due diligence on their supply chain. So, if you source so if you build a server and you get a part from Intel, you sold the product to the consumer and you might get drug into the conversation, but it would be the HP or Dell or Lenovo would be the primary entity would be in scope. So it's not your whole supply chain, but you need to be doing effective due diligence to reduce risk as much as possible. That's your obligation. So you need to be holding your suppliers responsible and have them help you be compliant.
So Jesse mentioned one of my favorite examples or counterexamples, which is about the banking app. I think it's worth discussing, and I'm not sure I stand on it. So let's say I buy Flight Radar 24. I don't know, people use that to track planes, right? I'm clearly buying a service, right? I'm paying for that thing. And so that is being made available in the EU on the market. And therefore, clearly the CRA applies to it. If I'm a bank, I could say, well, I'm making available this application, but you're not paying for the application. I have a service which you're using, which is separate, but you're not paying for the application, just servicing your account. Why should that application be subject to the CRA? And I'm not sure I have a good answer for that, and I think it's worth discussing. So.
Fun fact, there is a different law that applies to banks, which I believe is DORA.
Okay, so ignore the banking one, but as a general use case, he always has an answer. But do you know what I mean? If you're servicing something else, right? Does it count if you're actually giving away the application for free?
I don't know. I cannot give you advice on that. I would ask you to consult your legal weasel, and they'll hopefully help you. Mr. Bohannon might have an opinion, though.
No. So again, Mark Bohannon again. So my reason why I suggest to people suspend logic is this is a great example. The impetus for the CRA was in fact to go after the Internet of Things, IoT products. Okay. So the irony is what you're describing is precisely what was meant to be addressed by the CRA. My policy answer, not a legal answer, is that what would be relevant are the components of what's in that app are very much potentially subject, but the app itself, since they're not selling it, is not. That's the way I would think about it. But this was meant to address, and in fact, we all argued for years, have this just apply to IoT, and that's a much more focused way to do this. No, they wanted, my favorite quote was someone in the commission, we were meeting and said, well, my lettuce is regulated better than software is. So let's get it better. And I'm like, literally, that was a comment.
So this is the mentality, the framework, the experience they're bringing to this. But keep in mind, this was originally driven by a desire to regulate IoT.
Thank you.
Just to add to that,
Yes.
what he said 1,000 times over, right? Regulators in Europe are really pissed off at the industry for not solving this problem. And they're not super interested in your nuances, right? And they have the power. And they're going to use that power, and they're going to make your lives very difficult if you don't try fixing this and doing it. It's just that they're not screwing around. Decades of waiting for it to get fixed out have not worked out, and they stopped waiting. And the botnet thing of IoT, they're worried about not just your router not working well for you or leaking your internet. They're worried about it becoming a botnet taking over the next nuclear power plants, right? They really care. And then if you are like, well, I'm giving this software away, like, are you doing business? Is this software part of your business? Screw you, right? They're not interested in your nuances, right? To illustrate the lack of nuance in their thinking here, right? They didn't even put open source on this until after a couple of iterations and a lot of noise and a lot of really helpful people banging drums very loudly. And so it was going to be a train wreck of epic proportions because they didn't want open source. And they look, to be blunt, at the Linux Foundation as an industry consortium that allows them to hide behind a nonprofit as opposed to being liable for things. They're not wrong. They're not right. It's complicated. It's nuanced. They don't care about nuance.
Right.
So if you're sitting there and you do business in Europe with a product that has a digital element, you are on the hook. And they don't care about any reason you can find to get away from it. I am not a lawyer, and I don't care if I say these things.
Right. Please. We have extra, so I'm done. We have extra time before the next session. If you would like to wander away or continue the conversation, please.
Yeah, we have about 20 more minutes.
Yeah.
If you want to stick around, if not.
I'm here.
There's
all
another
week.
question from Discord. And I think you might have touched on this, so it maybe just be covering some of the slides
Sure.
again. Can you provide some resources for a company trying to be compliant with many of the EU regulations, such as Product Liability Directive and CRA? Are these covered in some of these resources where companies can be more efficient with the information that is related?
Yes, that is, again, reflecting back on my work on the security baseline and this artifact I'm showing on the screen. I have taken the baseline requirements and I have lined it up horizontally with all my OpenSSF tools like Salsa and Scorecard and stuff. But then I line it up with the CRA, the SSDF, the CSF, OpenChain, OpenCRE. I'm in the middle of mapping a PCI DSS, a thing called PSCRIM. Then I'm going to move into DORA in NIST 2. So resources like this, you can see if I do this, one control here, you tick off the boxes on multiple compliance regimes. And this, while I have not explicitly done 27,001 and 2, all of my training and certifications are sourced with 27,001 and 2. So directionally, this also follows that, but I haven't done the direct mapping yet. But so, yes, there are resources available that will show you, you do these three things and you are able to either have evidence to defend yourself or you're doing the right practices to be able to meet that obligation. This is not for open source projects. Actually, I worked in banking for 7 years and I had this spreadsheet because we had numerous banking regulators that I had to be beholden to, and I was tired of failing audits. So we followed the strictest compliance regime where I worked, and this has been the kind of the progeny of that work. So yes, if you follow some of these things, which again are mom and apple pie cybersecurity, but this is focused on development, software creation, compilation, build, and publication, and then operationalization. It's a mouthful. So yes, things like this help you meet your different laws and frameworks.
So on the reporting timelines,
Yes.
did I understand the second set of them was just on pure discovery of vulnerabilities?
Yeah, that's normal vulnerabilities.
So companies with like super active bug bounty programs are pretty hosed at this point until they figure out some way to report everything constantly?
Yeah, there are some adjustments everyone's going to need to make to their programs. There is, and I can't recall what article it is, but they do address things like embargoes. So in certain circumstances, you can get exclusion from the timeline, but they don't give you a well-defined criteria, and it's kind of weaselly, vaguely worded. But basically, I think you would need to petition ENISA predominantly to say, hey, I have a vulnerability. It's going to take me 3 months to get staged downstream. And I'd like to ask to be excluded from the timeline for this particular instance. But yeah, if you have a very active bug bounty program, or you're somebody like Red Hat, Canonical, or SUSE that you're pushing out 100 patches a day, there's going to be some adjustments you're going to need to make to figure out how you're going to deliver those fixes and the timeline requirements.
So my
Did I answer your
understanding-
question?
Yeah.
Awesome.
So to add to that a bit, my understanding of that is this is one of those places where they're looking for manufacturers to get really good relationships with the local CSIRTs and stuff, so that they know how this works and it's not a surprise, basically.
Right. Phoning a friend. Hello.
So first of all, I'm not a lawyer. Very important to mention. Regarding severe incident, I think you had okay, Bear.
Yes.
Cool. Right. So regarding severe incident, I think the definition included something like sensitive or important data functions. So
Yes.
so that means it's not applicable to necessarily any vulnerability, but it's going to be a mess to actually draw the line.
Right.
As to where that is, right? Do you have I think you had the definition somewhere else.
This is it right here.
Yeah, sensitive or important data or functions.
Yeah, so essentially, predominantly focused on consumer data. So think GDPR type
PII
things,
stuff.
PII, PHI.
Yeah.
So if your app, your thing, if it breaks, has the ability to expose that information, that's the severe incident. Broadly, anything that touches confidentiality probably is going to be in scope. And again, then integrity.
Depends on the data, right?
Depends on the data. I don't know that they're interested in having that debate, but yes. So there are the potential to have things that aren't in scope, but then you're modifying your core like PSIRT vulnerability triage and handling process. So do you want to have two different processes, and do you have the ability, do you know how your customers are using your product, how they have it deployed, and what data it touches in their environment?
The whole 72-hour to get a public security advisory that includes mitigations might be quite convincing to have two processes, right?
And we have provided, NISA was here last year. We had some inkling of these timelines. The industry has provided, and FIRST has provided them feedback that these are potentially going to be onerous. The law got published, and that's what it is. And they're not really interested in adjusting those particular pieces. So it's incumbent upon you and your teammates, your legal team, your corporate compliance, if you do like common criteria or whatever, it's up to your group to figure out how you're going to meet these. And again, if you have third-party dependencies, you hopefully have a bat phone to your suppliers, or you're embedded, you're working and contributing upstream, that you can influence their ability to help you get these fixes in the timeframes needed.
When they have a vulnerability, it's your code, it's your vulnerability, it's your risk, it's your liability, it's your problem. You have to engage. I know that most of you have IT organizations that are budget as a percentage of revenue to ensure business stand up. What percentage of your IT budget is going towards your upstream supply? I would bet that right now, most of you is pushing zero. The risk management people will wake up and say, well, we should do something about that. Folk didn't say it loud enough or nasty enough. I'm saying it nasty.
I'm a nice guy. So Mr. Windsor brings up a very valid point that Everything in your product, including all the open source, is your problem in the commission's eyes. You own it, even though you might not have created it. It is in your best interest to figure out how you can effectively collaborate and engage with your upstream development community. Anything in Linux, Kubernetes, all the database programs. You need to have engagement, and you should be participating and understand how quickly they can turn the crank to release updates and what you can do to support them potentially move more quickly.
Good morning, CRob.
Hello, LaRock.
How are you?
I'm great.
Excellent. So a number of people obviously are concerned about the reporting requirements and the definition of actively exploited vulnerability and severe incident. And if anyone has a takeaway and they are interested in reading anything in the CRA itself, I would encourage them to do a search for parentheses, 68 back parentheses, which is a recital in the CRA itself, which talks about exactly what an actively exploited vulnerability is and a severe incident. It might not be as bad as you think. And just to caveat, I'm not a lawyer either.
Right. Thank you. So okay, I'm about to lie. I hope I didn't scare the crap out of you. I really did. We're here to help each other, so please engage. Because I'm a nice guy, come on. But you all have a lot of stuff to do, and people like upstream can help, and you can help each other. There are people in this room that are actively developing programs within their organizations. Reach out and talk to them. Learn what other people are doing. Open, like all of my work, all of Eclipse's work, and Apache, and everyone, all of our work is public. Learn from what we're doing and adopt what you like. Participate, please, to help, because at the end of the day, I'm not the one going to court. Sorry, not sorry. I think we have any other questions on Discord or in the room? We have a whole day of this in this room. So we have different perspectives. We're trying to track down if Casper from ENISA is going to present. We had hoped that we were going to come talk about the single reporting platform and the new EU database. Great, that's awesome. So this is a must-watch, the ENISA presentation, because you're going to get information about how all this vulnerability reporting is going to work.
That's coming up at 11.
11. And again, it's not completely defined. They're still working through how this is going to look, but we're at the stage where they are actively seeking feedback from the community. So please listen, get an idea of how the single reporting platform and the national CSIRT relationship is going to work out, and ask questions. And thank you all. I appreciate it. I hope you found this useful. That's it. Have a great day.
Thank you, folks. This ends the session. Thanks, CRob.